They've both fallen. Unfortunately, this one, a smaller stone, is in really bad condition. It's deteriorated terribly, and even in my bare hands, I could pull some of this grass off. But we see this is granular disintegration. The stone is actually just disintegrating. Sometimes this is called sugaring, and it's pretty much gone. So it's like ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This is really too far gone to do anything with. It's unfortunate, but it's been on the ground a really long time. So we could try to raise this up and put it on gravel a little, but there's not much left there. There might be a little readable actually on this piece. So it would probably be good to clean it off and get some photos if we could to see what's on here. But other than that, this is pretty much too far gone. It's kind of a worst case scenario for marble. This is in much better condition, but unfortunately it's broken close to the ground. So this might be a good example to put in a new replacement base, because if we fix this so low down, it's probably going to fracture again. So it's like sail area, and it's not great doing a repair this low. And anyway, these are both broken, fallen marble tablets. This one definitely savable. That one is definitely too far gone. Okay, so we have a bigger, larger marble monument here, three-piece monument, actually a really robust, very tall base, which is more of a regional material. It looks like probably a limestone. And then we have an upper base out of marble, and then we have a large, about 4-inch thick, large marble headstone. And unfortunately, this has a bunch of different problems. And we can see from the side over here that it's leaning. The base that's you know, the way the base is sitting right now, we can see what looks like some sandstone or bricks behind it. And so it seems like they put some kind of foundation under it, but it's really high. The whole base is out of the ground. A base of this style should probably be going in the ground about 3 or 4 inches at least, and obviously it should be sitting level. So I'm not sure if it heaved or there was movement for some reason, but whatever the cause is, it's badly leaning forward. Now if we come over to the back here and look at it, this was a kind of a modified socket base actually originally. This style stone had a keyway in the bottom. You can see the way it inset into the base, and we can turn this over here and look at the cross section, and actually right there we can see there's the tenon. But the interesting thing about this, and this is going to tell you definitively this was in a transitional time period when they did this, because they put a metal pin in and they also had the mortise and tenon. And so usually it's one or the other. And so this shows that, and I'm not looking at the date, but like 1890, you know, to 1900 kind of era, because eventually they would have moved away from having the mortise and tenon and then probably used a couple pins that were bigger. But so what happened here, this is metal jacking, rust jacking, and the metal expanded and split the stone. And so this could be fixed, but it's kind of complicated. Take it all apart, lower this base somehow and reset it at the proper height, and then join the upper base, and then get that joined to the lower base, and then deal with joining the headstone to the upper base. So it's kind of an involved process, What
about the sailboat or wind thing with it cut so low to the base?
Well, it's a different style. So once they went into surface joining, I mean, this did have the mortise and tenon, but this is 4 inches wide. And so we have a lot more surface area here to work with. So we could also, and I'm not, you know, excited about it, but we could drill a couple of new pinholes if we wanted to, if we did it carefully. And so there'd be some different options to do that. But anyway, it is repairable, but it's not an easy repair. So we have a small broken marble tablet that's in a socket base. This is a great example because we can remove it. There's no historic bonding material left for whatever reason. It was probably a lime mortar or a plaster. It fractured also. Unfortunately, there's a little loss on the bottom. There's a missing piece. But we'll start by just taking this fragment and seeing if it fits well. And it's almost a perfect fit, slides nicely in place. There's a little loss, but it's a good fit. And so obviously it would be sitting plumb. And so we know that's repairable, and there's still a lot here to save. All the inscription is here. There's also some nice carving. So we'll remove this to the side for a second, and we'll look at the rest of it. So this is a great example of a mortise. Of a slotted base. This can be called a keyway. It can be called a slotted base or a mortise, and has a bunch of different names that can be used. The stone is in fact a tenon. Now we'll look at the upper portion, the bigger piece here, and unfortunately broken off at an angle, and there's a little loss, and it probably was going a little, I'm not sure if it was, ending here or down here. It looks like this hopefully is all the inscription. It seems like it is. And we can pretty much save it. So we would want to level the lower base first. And again, this is like a regional material, like a sandstone or limestone. This is a marble. And so if we were to level the base and clean it all out, then we would use a historic pointing mortar. And then we could join this, and it goes right down to the inscription because there's loss, but we can just about save all the inscription if we're careful how we set it. And so then we would put a historic pointing mortar in here, and then we would point it in with a tuck pointer, and then get that plumb, and then we could join the top on it. So this is repairable, and there's plenty here to work with, so it would be a good one to save. So maybe we'll do this tomorrow.
The pointing mortar, is that the gray stuff you're using on tucking in around on that?
No, we didn't get that out yet. No, that's like more of like a mortar you add water, but it's not, there's no Portland cement in it, and it's going to be an off-white color. It's going to be softer than a conventional modern mortar because modern mortar's super strong and hard and tenacious and impossible to ever get off later. And so it's like more friendly to the stone. The overall principle with historic pointing mortar is really going to come from architecture, and say a historic brick structure that was built before 1900 is going to have soft bricks, handmade bricks. And so the main thing we want is a mortar that's similar in hardness and is more breathable than a modern mortar. And so we're looking for compatibility, and also think of a historic pointing mortar in a structure as something that's more sacrificial. And so the first thing that should fail would be the mortar, and then you could scrape it away and repoint it. If you use a really hard mortar, like a modern mortar, and people think fix it once and do it right, use a really hard mortar, the problem is that it'll be harder than the stone, than the stone or the brick or the masonry, the substrate, and it will cause future damage. It will cause spalling. It won't allow breathability or expansion and contraction. And so we want compatibility with mortars. And so in the case of a keyway, it's exactly the same as historic architecture, but this carries over into beyond this, and not in this site, but I work in some older sites with box tombs and crypts and brick structures that are just like a little miniature historic house, small mausoleums and things like that. And if they're made of historic brick, then you want to use a mortar appropriate to use with those historic bricks. So we're looking at another monument that's got a whole host of problems, actually, a gravestone. And it's a marble gravestone, had some nice carving, the finger pointing up to heaven. And unfortunately, this broke a long time ago, and they performed a repair on it. And so the repair they did actually is quite interesting. They drilled holes in it. Oh, I see what they did. Okay, so we can pull it sideways to actually see. And so this was a historic kind of repair technique, and they actually drilled holes right through the entire stone. I'm assuming and here's the bottom. And so they would drill a hole here and a hole here, and they put some type of metal banding on it that connected them. And that has fallen off and been lost. Someone took it away or whatever. But that's what they would have, that's why they drilled holes like that. And so there was basically the way I clamped the stone when we braced it. it with the wood blocks, they did the same thing permanently by drilling holes and putting metal flat stock on it, mild steel probably. And I've seen this repair. This is a common repair technique that was done a lot historically, and I've seen it done really well with like bronze, and I've seen stones repaired like this that the repair maybe is 75 or even more years old, and they still are holding up really well. And you will see the metal on it, but they have not failed. But unfortunately, for whatever combination, in the case of this, a mild steel is going to expand and crack the stone, and so this has unfortunately failed. Now the next thing we see is, because this has been in the dirt so long since it was broken, fixed, rebroken, that it's incredible amount of sugaring. See, with my bare hand, I can touch it, and the stone is coming off in my hand. The term is sugaring, see that? And a more technical term for that is granular disintegration, and it means the stone has lost its structural integrity, and so it no longer has strength, and it's just kind of falling apart. And so it's hard to know how deeply that is happening, but this is somewhat problematic, and it would be a tricky one to fix. But if they fit together well, we could probably get it together. But this would be a good candidate to add some possible external reinforcement after it was joined due to the level of sugaring on it. Unfortunate, but sitting in the ground for long periods of time for marble is usually very detrimental. It tends to dissolve the marble. It will vary a lot depending on the region you're in, the amount of moisture, and also what the soil is composed of. Some soils are less acidic than others, and but the moisture itself, and certainly in an acidic environment, will just slowly dissolve the marble, and so it'll make it harder and harder to join. And this edge is somewhat eroded, but it's not terrible because it's not in the ground, so it's going to actually weather better generally above ground than it is in the ground. So stones are different in that way, and a sandstone usually will be very well preserved underground, but a marble will tend to deteriorate badly, and so it depends on the geology of the stone. But that's about it on this one. So it's kind of a can of worms, but not necessarily impossible to fix, but unfortunately it's been in the ground for a long time and it's very eroded.
Would you ever cut it off, the last inch or so?
There wouldn't be much left if we did that, and the inscription wouldn't line up. So generally I wouldn't recommend that. There might be some rare circumstances. Certainly a tablet stone that's broken really low to the ground without the inscription, sometimes you want to square that edge off to put it in a new socket base. But something like this, yeah, I wouldn't want to cut this. There wouldn't be much left. I think these pieces would actually fit together, but the main thing is it wouldn't have that much structural integrity because the joint itself wouldn't be that strong. So we would need some external bracing or some additional support added. And drilling and pinning would not have a positive effect at all because it's so crumbly and weak, and it would just cause deterioration and it would not add strength. So
aluminum C-channel on the outside?
It's hard to put a channel on the outside of something that has tapered edges and something so wide. So there's no easy answer. You could put a backer stone on it if someone really wanted to, which would be a whole nother piece of stone along the whole back, which wouldn't really change the aesthetic of the front. You could gain a lot of strength that way. It seems like in different areas of the region, they were telling me in a lot of parts of Iowa, they put like metal fence posts behind them to try to get them up, and they do some. Have you seen those?
Not a lot, but it would make sense as a...
There's no one simple answer, but you'd have to come up with some structural support to, to reinforce it, to brace it, or it's going to tend to break again.
Would you put that epoxy on it with a backer stone?
You would.
Hold them together?
That would certainly be an option, and probably you'd want to join it like that in some way, but it's kind of a complicated thing to fix. Additionally, the bottom the bottom portion is leaning, so that would have to be straightened as well. So it's a very difficult stone to fix. Not necessarily impossible, but unless this was your family stone, probably not one you're going to concentrate on because there's a lot of other work here. And also prevention, as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so it's better to try to catch things that are about to fall and get things up off the ground that are still you know, have enough integrity to be joined. And so this one is kind of questionable, but you'd have to get into it more closely and actually clean the surfaces, dry fit them, see how they fit together, and then give it some thought as far as, you know, what the procedure would be. But it's not a simple fix. This is kind of a really beautiful, almost eerily beautiful carving of this kind of angel, but it's so weathered because it's been on the ground so long. And so we can kind of move the pieces and take a look, and it seems like without any excavation, not sure if this base is cracked. It's a really oversized base for a small stone. It seems to be repairable. It's a clean fracture, and you can see the difference. I mean, this is has much more structural integrity. I mean, this stone is not crumbly. So, you know, part of it, it's not all the way it was broken or in the soil. Some of it has to do possibly with the geology of the particular stone. And even in one quarry from one area to another, there's a variability within the strength of the stone. And so it's impossible for us to know you know, all the causes, but we can just examine it and look at it. And I don't have a tool handy, but if I had a sharp tool, I mean, you can see this is still in pretty good condition. Actually, I can see now, just with my bare hands, pretty sure that this is a previous repair was done. Yeah, I can see it right here. And there was, this was joined once with some adhesive, and it's failed a long time ago. But this looks much more repairable. This actually looks like a simple repair, and this would be a good one to fix tomorrow. Broken low to the ground is not ideal, but it all has to do with the size and weight of the stone. On a small stone like this, anyone could pick this up that has, you know, some decent strength. It's not really dangerous, and so it's not, even if this were to break again someday, it's not like it's going to fall on someone and crush them. And so we could do a repair low down like that, because if we do, anything else will be so much work and really difficult. Like to lower this into this base, we'd have to grind all that away. That would be ideal, because doing a repair so low is not ideal. With that said, being a small stone, as long as the pieces fit together well, there's still a lot of dirt in here, but you can see the pieces clearly do fit together, and certainly we could perform a repair on this stone pretty well. It's also interesting to note this upper area broke right where they did such a deep carving, and you can see they took away almost half the width of the stone here to create this carving and to put this in relief like this. And so when they did that, they created a weakness. And so they you know, they had a lot of confidence in their abilities, but ultimately, you know, when it fell, that was a very weak point, and so it snapped right in that thinner area. But this is repairable. And once we clean these surfaces, we might want to re-level this base, because we'd want it to sand as plumb as possible. That will give us the best longevity. And there's different ways we could do a repair and maybe even reinforce it. But this would be a good one to work on. It's definitely fixable. It's a pretty stone. It's very eroded, but it still is readable. So it would be a nice one to get upright. So we're going to take a look at a tablet stone here. Sad for two children from 1866, January 26th and January 18th. So two children, Annie and Benny. They both have little kind of lambs carved in relief. And but we'll focus on the way it broke and the causes of the breakage. And this is pretty much a classic kind of problem with this style 2-inch thick marble stone, is that it's very weak right where it meets the ground contact, and so it's really strongly supported underneath, but right when it projects out of the ground is the weak point. And so this is kind of a classic case of you know, getting knocked by mowers or something acted upon it, and it snapped right at the grade. And so probably pretty fixable. We could dig this up and raise this lower piece. I'm not really sure. This could actually be put in a replacement base also and set like right here. And if we made a new base with a keyway, we could then set this and there would be no weak point. It would be, it would last indefinitely then. but it's still a nice stone. It's still very readable. I don't see a lot of hairline cracks running through it or anything, and so it's totally savable. And right now you can see like mowers and things riding over it and kind of scraping away at it, so it's not helping it any. So it's savable, but it needs, you know, we've got to take it out of the ground and come up with a plan. So be a good one to fix. Okay, so we have a pretty large looking memorial here, monument, and little different color to it. It has sort of a gray cast to it, and you know, an average person would think it was just a different color stone, but in fact it's not stone at all. This is actually metal, and it's actually hollow. And if we go like that, you can tell. And it's actually almost pure zinc. And this was a style of monument that came into being after the Civil War. And the company was the Monumental Bronze Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they marketed this as white bronze, and the color was darker. Actually, you can see up here in the protected areas a little more of the coloration. These tend to oxidize over time, so the color was definitely a little darker originally. It's hard to see, be sure how it looked originally. Anyway, these are hollow. These are much lighter, like a fraction of the weight of a stone monument. And these came to be really popular in the 1880s, 1890s. And the company existed after that, but by World War I, the metal was in too great demand, and stone working technologies had greatly improved, so these kind of fell out of favor. But these were revolutionary in their timeline. They were less expensive. The modern stone industry, the stone industry at that point, actually in the late 1800s was a very interesting time because the marble industry was still very productive and making a lot of monuments, and it was used in architecture, but the granite stone industry was growing, and they were competing with each other, and generally they were not the same owners, and generally they were not friends. There was different companies competing because the technologies to work the stones were different, and, you know, different ownership of the quarries. Well, this option was available at the same time. So there was marble, there was granite, there was many different color granites, mostly domestic throughout America, and then there was also these metal monuments. And so these were also revolutionary in the time because these panels actually came off. There was a special little tool. You can see this little side is broken, and this had 1, 2, 3 of these connectors. This is an interesting shape because it was made just to fit in here. But they would make panels, and you can see on the back here, there's panels for individuals, and actually the color looks really good on these. This is probably more of the original color of the monument because it's so protected, because it's set in, kind of has a double kind of recess and a little rooftop over it, so it's not getting a lot of weathering. Right here you see what appears to be not the original fasteners, because I can see there's slotted screws and there's rust coming off of them, which is not typical. And but be that as it may, these panels could be replaced. And so, in other words, when somebody passed away, you know, usually at least one person would pass away and you'd buy the monument. Sometime a pre-need monument, no one had died yet, but they bought the monument in advance, pre-need, in advance of need. But say, assuming one person had passed away, they would have inscription, a panel for one of the people. But this is a family plot, and so that when their wife or, you know, child or whoever in the family passed away, then they could order a new plaque, and they could have that shipped to them, and all they had to do was install it, and so it matched the monument, and they didn't have to send a stone carver out to the site. There's a lot, because these are completely hollow, there's a huge space in the middle. There's a lot of legends during Prohibition of bootleg being hidden in these. I have yet to see any documentation of that, but I would be very curious to see that. But I've heard the legend 100 times, and it seems likely that might have occurred at some point. This is interesting. It says born in New York, and but But anyway, so these were white bronze. A lot of time they would have the name here. There was actually an affiliate much closer to here, I believe in Des Moines, Iowa. And so a lot of them say Des Moines, Iowa. But the technology, I'm not sure if they were ever made in Iowa or just distributed through Iowa, but the technology originally came out of Monumental Bronze Company, was based in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And again, their heyday in production was probably the 1880s to right around 1900, and they started to decline in popularity. Some of the biggest cemeteries made regulations prohibiting these because they said they were like cheesy or cheap alternatives to stone, and they wouldn't last. And so that, and again, marble was being used a lot then. So you can see that these have tended to last much better than many of the marble monuments. But it was a very interesting chapter in American monuments. So there's little fittings, and they would oftentimes connect these to like local stone, like a slab of limestone, and they are these little kind of fittings, and they would like probably pour some lead or sulfur or something in to tie it together. And we might be able to see it on these little markers. Sometimes these are not well attached, and this one is. These all are, so that's a good thing. They're not loose or anything. So we can't see the inside of them. Clearly these are sunken because they would normally be projecting higher. Sometimes the mowers hit these and do a lot of damage. This is died in 1920. That's getting a little late for these. I think the company kept making replacement panels until up to World War II. And then they were done. But they were, in the last years, they were not so productive. I'm not sure of their exact timeline. There are actually a couple books now written about them, I believe, but a lot of articles online, and it's a really interesting chapter in American memorials. So
the zinc doesn't oxidize, and it seems pretty thin when you knock on it.
well, it's more like a sculpture that it's a shell, and so it is oxidized actually, because that is the color change, or there's a patina on it, but it does hold up quite well. They're very hard to fix if they get damaged. I will say the biggest ones, and there was a really giant one we saw in Cedar Rapids, I mean giant, like 20 feet tall kind of, and all the weight combined, when it hits the bottom, sometimes the bottom will deform and it almost looks like it's flowing metal, and it's the accumulative weight on the lower portions because there's not enough internal support. And in sculpture they would call that internal support an armature, or you would call it like a frame or a skeleton. And so and they're very difficult to fix because I'm not an expert in metalworking, but I know people who are. It's, if you heat it up too much, it just basically disappears. And so what I was told is that it's more like doing body work on a car, and you have to very slowly tap them back, but they're very brittle. So it's very tricky to work on them, like if a tree falls on it or something occurs. But for the most part, they hold up really well, and they're really cool. They made molds, and you can see that they mimicked all of the same styles on the stone monuments. So this is the drop wash. This area is called a margin. This is a rock pitch. This would be raised letters. And so they mimicked all of the styles that you would see in a granite monument. If this was a granite monument, it would be one piece, probably two pieces, three pieces, and then a fourth piece would be a capstone. And so with this, you can see the seams on these a lot of times, just like this, and that has to do with the way they actually made it and joined it together. But they tend to hold up really well, and they're all over America, and they're really, they're always interesting. They come in all different shapes and sizes, or they did back then.
What's the best way to clean this?
I mean, just like a non-ionic detergent, like it's not gonna, the color's not gonna change, so it's more just like soap and water. I mean, just a garden hose or just like a brush and a sprayer. I mean, just to get the loose stuff off of it. It doesn't really need that much. I mean, there is actually a little biological on it. So D2 is completely safe on metal, so certainly you could use that on this. It's kind of unusual, but it does seem like there's a green cast to the top here, but some of that could be sap. But D2 is completely safe on metal, and it does have surfactants in it. So since that's used so much in cemeteries, that would probably be a good option. But probably a non-ionic detergent, something like Volpex, is another option. That's a really good cleaning agent. You use it in a very small amount. It's highly concentrated, and you just make a solution. Just like almost soap and water. I mean, it's metal, so it's much more stable. It's not going to absorb anything like stone will. So pretty much just like water and a brush will take most of the loose stuff off. And then, you know, for this kind of staining, like, yeah, maybe the D2 or non-ionic detergent.